Did the first humans smell bad? Have you ever wondered whether the first humans on Earth smelled bad? How did they manage their personal hygiene, if they managed it at all? Did those first humans simply live covered in dirt, animal blood and mud, without caring about anything related to their own bodies? Or was something happening, some practice, some behavior, some knowledge about their own bodies that we never stopped to investigate seriously? In this video from First Humans, we are going to talk about exactly that. We are going to dive deep into the lives of the first humans on Earth and discover what archaeology, biology and anthropology reveal about how those first humans cared for their bodies 40,000 years ago, before soap existed, before deodorant existed, before any hygiene product had ever been invented. And what we are going to discover together is going to surprise you completely, because the first humans on Earth were not what you imagine. They were much more than that. Subscribe now to First Humans. Hit the bell and come with us to discover how the first humans on Earth lived, survived and cared for their bodies in a world that had absolutely nothing of what you use today to feel clean. It starts now. Think seriously about what it means to live without any hygiene product, not for a day, not for a week, for your entire life. From the moment you are born until the moment you die, without a single product created to clean or perfume the human body. No soap, no shampoo, no deodorant, no toothpaste, no toilet paper, no hot running water, nothing at all. It is almost impossible for most of us to truly imagine this, because we live in a culture so saturated with hygiene products that the simple act of waking up in the morning already involves 5, 6, 7 different products before even leaving the house. But the first humans on Earth, those men and women of the Upper Paleolithic who lived between 40,000 and 10,000 years ago, did exactly that for the entirety of their existence. And what science has discovered about how their bodies functioned under those conditions is one of the most fascinating and least told stories in human history. To begin to understand this story properly, we first need to undo an enormous misconception that most people carry without realizing it. When we imagine the first humans on Earth, we tend to imagine them as defective versions of ourselves. Creatures halfway between animal and human, covered in mud, living in dark caves, without enough intelligence to worry about things like hygiene or appearance. This image is completely false, and it is important to say that clearly before going further. The first humans of the Upper Paleolithic were biologically identical to you in every way that matters. Their brains were the same size as yours, the same structures, the same capabilities. They had complex language, sophisticated art, elaborate rituals, rich social systems, and a practical intelligence about the natural world around them that most modern humans simply no longer possess. They painted animals on cave walls with a precision and aesthetic sense that art specialists still admire today. They made stone tools with a technique that took years to learn, and that very few people in the world today would be capable of replicating. They navigated across immense territories without maps, using the sky, the wind, the animals, and the plants as instruments of orientation. These were not primitive beings. They were the first complete humans this planet ever saw, and they had bodies that needed to be cared for, bodies that produced sweat and odor and dirt, exactly like yours. The question about the smell of the first humans begins with a basic understanding of biology that most people do not have, and that completely changes the way you are going to think about this subject. Human body odor does not come from sweat. That is the first and most important thing to understand. Sweat itself, when it leaves the body, is practically odorless. It is an aqueous solution with small amounts of salt and minerals that smells of almost nothing when fresh. The odor we associate with human sweat is not the sweat itself. It is the result of the interaction between sweat and the bacteria that naturally live on human skin. When those bacteria consume the components of sweat, especially the sweat produced by the so-called apocrine glands that are concentrated in the armpits, the groin and some other areas of the body, they produce volatile chemical compounds that travel through the air and reach other people's noses as body odor. These compounds include butyric acid, which has a smell of cheese or rancid butter, sulfur compounds that produce pungent and sharp notes, and dozens of other smaller molecules with their own specific odor profiles. What this means in practice is that the intensity of a person's body odor depends fundamentally on 3 things. First, the composition of the bacterial community that lives on their skin. Second, the quantity and composition of the sweat that this community has available to consume. And third, the person's diet, because what you eat directly influences the chemistry of the sweat your body produces. And when you understand these three factors, you begin to realize that the lives of the first humans on Earth may have influenced each of them in ways that make the image of the smelly prehistoric hunter far more complicated than it appears. Let us start with the factor that most surprises people when they discover it: diet. The first humans on Earth ate in a way that any modern nutritionist would describe as extraordinarily clean and natural. They ate meat from wild animals that had spent their entire lives running across open landscapes, eating native vegetation, without antibiotics, without hormones, without processed feed. They ate fish when they lived near rivers and lakes, which was frequent because the first humans tended to follow routes close to water. They ate wild fruits, much smaller and much less sweet than the cultivated fruits we know today, because the process of agricultural domestication multiplied the sugar content of fruits over millennia of artificial selection. They ate roots, tubers, bulbs, and other vegetables they found in the soil. They ate nuts, seeds, and chestnuts. In many environments, they ate insects, which are one of the most nutritious and efficient protein sources nature offers. What they did not eat is as important as what they did eat. They did not eat refined sugar. They did not eat processed flour. They did not eat ultra-processed foods full of artificial additives, preservatives, colorings, and synthetic flavorings. They did not eat dairy in most contexts, because the genetic capacity to digest milk in adult life was not yet common in most human populations of this period. They did not drink alcohol regularly. They did not consume any of the thousands of synthetic compounds that modern humans ingest daily through processed foods, and that influence in ways still poorly understood the chemistry of sweat and skin secretions. The science about the relationship between diet and body odor is far more solid than most people imagine. A study published in the scientific journal Chemical Senses, one of the most respected publications in the field of odor and chemical perception research, evaluated the body odor of men who followed two different types of diet, one based on red meats from domestic animals and refined carbohydrates, and another based on vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and fish. The study participants wore cotton t-shirts for a set period, and the t-shirts were then evaluated by women who knew nothing about who had used them or what diet each person followed. The results were clear and statistically significant. The t-shirts worn by men who ate diets based on vegetables, fruits, and fish were consistently rated as producing more pleasant, less intense, and more attractive odor than the t-shirts of men who ate red meat and refined carbohydrates. The researchers went further and analyzed the chemical composition of the sweat of both groups using gas chromatography, a method that identifies the chemical compounds present in a sample, and confirmed that there were objective and measurable differences in sweat chemistry based on dietary patterns, differences that explained the odor evaluations made by the human participants. If you apply these findings to the first humans on Earth, who followed a whole and unprocessed diet by definition, who had never eaten refined sugar or grain-fed domestic animal meat their entire lives, the implication is significant. The dietary contribution to the body odor of those first humans was probably considerably less intense than that of the average modern person following a contemporary Western diet. This alone enormously complicates the simple narrative that prehistoric people must have smelled worse than us. Now let us talk about the relationship of the first humans with water, because this is another point where the popular image is completely wrong. There is a widespread idea that prehistoric human beings simply did not bathe, that they lived in damp caves without ever worrying about cleaning themselves, that hygiene is an invention of civilization that did not exist before cities and soap. This idea has no scientific support and contradicts everything we know about how the first humans lived. The first humans on Earth lived in intimate relationship with the natural environment, and that environment was full of water. They followed rivers and streams because those waterways were the roads of the world they inhabited, connecting different territories and providing food in the form of fish, shellfish, waterfowl, and the animals that came to drink. They camped near lakes and springs because water was survival, and they understood that better than any modern human who has never had to find their own water source. They crossed rivers, swam in lakes, waded through streams as an absolutely routine part of their daily life. The most direct evidence we have about the hygiene habits of the first humans comes from the study of contemporary hunter-gatherer groups that maintained lifestyles relatively similar to those of the first humans of the Paleolithic until the modern period. The San of the Kalahari, the Hadza of Tanzania, the Agta of the Philippines, the Piraha of the Amazon, and several other groups that anthropologists and ethnographers have studied in detail over the past 100 years, all show the same pattern: regular contact with water, use of natural materials to clean the body, and an attention to personal hygiene that is no less intense than that of modern humans, just different in the methods used. The Hadza, for example, whose lifestyle is considered one of the closest contemporary analogies to Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, bathe in rivers and streams with regular frequency, use small sticks and fibrous materials to clean their teeth, and rub their skin with specific plant materials that they recognize as having cleaning properties. They do this not because a modern hygiene culture instructed them to, but because they were doing it before any contact with the modern world, because it is what intelligent human beings living near water naturally do. There is also direct archaeological evidence that the first humans on Earth used natural materials to care for their bodies. Ochre, the iron oxide pigment that appears in virtually all archaeological sites associated with modern Homo sapiens around the world, has multiple potential uses, and several researchers argue on solid grounds that one of its practical uses was as a cleansing and deodorizing agent for the skin. Ochre has measurable antibacterial properties. When rubbed onto the skin, it absorbs moisture and oils and reduces bacterial populations on the skin surface, consequently reducing odor production. It also functions as a natural sunscreen, absorbing part of the ultraviolet radiation and reducing skin damage. The fact that ochre appears not only in artistic contexts, but in contexts clearly associated with ornamentation and body care, mixed with animal fats in compositions that appear to have been applied directly to the skin, suggests that the first humans understood and used its cosmetic and hygienic properties in a deliberate and regular way. They did not have deodorant spray, but they had ochre, which functions in a not completely different way in terms of reducing bacterial odor, and they used it. The ash from fires is another material the first humans had in constant and abundant supply, and that has significant hygienic properties that rarely appear in discussions of prehistoric hygiene. Wood ash is mildly alkaline, and when rubbed onto the skin or used to scrub the body, it functions as a natural cleansing agent, breaking down oils and killing bacteria in a way not entirely unlike the action of soap. Modern soap is, in its essence, an alkaline product, and the first human experiments with soap making probably began exactly with the observation that ash mixed with animal fat had cleaning properties. But long before any human had deliberately made that experiment, the first humans already had access to ash in unlimited quantities, sat beside fires every night of their lives, and the idea that they never used this abundant and available material to clean the body requires that we assume a level of incuriosity and passivity that contradicts everything we know about the intelligence and adaptability of the first humans. Aromatic plants with antibacterial properties are another resource the first humans had and used. Several plant species produce chemical compounds, such as the essential oils of mint, eucalyptus, tea tree, lavender, and many others, that have scientifically documented antibacterial and antifungal properties. Many of these plants were common in the environments inhabited by the first humans, and archaeological evidence of the use of medicinal and aromatic plants appears in Paleolithic sites on several continents. The use of plant materials for body care is documented in virtually all hunter-gatherer groups studied by anthropologists, and there are solid reasons to believe this practice goes back much further than any historical record can directly confirm. Now let us talk about something that rarely appears in these discussions, but that is absolutely fundamental to understanding the hygiene of the first humans: the skin microbiome. Human skin is not a passive surface. It is a living ecosystem inhabited by billions of microorganisms. Bacteria, fungi, viruses, and other microscopic beings that form complex and dynamic communities with important roles in skin health and odor production. In its natural form, this ecosystem is dominated by relatively benign species that compete with each other and suppress the growth of the more odor-producing species. It is an ecological balance that natural selection has favored over millions of years of human evolution, because a healthy and balanced skin microbiome is a defense against infections and contributes to the general health of the organism. What modern science has discovered about the skin microbiome in the last 2 decades is disturbing in the context of contemporary hygiene. The intensive use of antibacterial products, soaps with antimicrobial agents, alcohol gel and other products designed to kill bacteria on the skin disrupts this ecosystem in ways that frequently favor exactly the most odor-producing bacteria that these products are intended to eliminate. This happens because the most odoriferous bacteria tend to be more resistant and more aggressive in recolonizing disrupted skin surfaces than the benign bacteria that normally suppress them. When you kill the bacteria in your armpit with antibacterial soap, you open space for the most resistant species, which are often the most odoriferous, to recolonize the area with less competition than they would face in an undisturbed microbiome. It is a cycle that hygiene product manufacturers never have an interest in explaining clearly, because the continuous disruption of the skin microbiome is exactly what keeps people buying deodorant every day. The skin microbiome of the first humans on Earth, never exposed to antibacterial products, never disrupted by chlorinated water or synthetic detergents, was probably in a state of natural ecological balance that modern skin rarely achieves. Research on populations that maintain traditional lifestyles with minimal use of modern hygiene products consistently shows that the skin microbiome of these populations is dominated by communities of microorganisms that are different and, in many respects, healthier than those found on the skin of people who use modern hygiene products intensively. This does not mean their skin was dirtier. It means the biology of their skin was different in ways that may have produced less intense or less unpleasant odor than the disrupted skin microbiomes that many modern people carry as a result of hygiene product overuse. The physical environment in which the first humans lived also contributed in important ways to the natural management of body odor. They lived outdoors, in constantly moving air. Wind is a powerful natural deodorizer, and people who spend their entire lives outdoors simply do not accumulate the layers of odor that develop when humans are confined in enclosed spaces with still air. The concentration of body odor we associate with human bodies is largely a product of confinement, of being in closed rooms, of wearing clothes that trap sweat against the skin, of living in buildings where air does not circulate freely. The first humans, sleeping under the open sky or in rock shelters with open fronts, living their entire waking lives outdoors, were constantly exposed to moving air that dispersed and diluted the volatile compounds their bodies produced almost as fast as those compounds were produced. Sunlight also played an important role that is rarely considered. Ultraviolet radiation from the sun is a powerful natural antibacterial agent, and skin that is regularly exposed to sunlight maintains a different bacterial community than skin that remains permanently covered by clothing. The first humans in tropical and subtropical regions lived with large areas of skin exposed to the sun during most of the day, meaning that sunlight was constantly reducing bacterial populations on the surface of their skin. The first humans in colder regions covered more of their bodies, but even in those cases, the exposure to sun and open air was dramatically greater than that of most modern humans who spend most of the day in enclosed environments with artificial lighting. The clothing of the first humans also functioned differently from modern clothing in terms of odor accumulation. The animal skin garments worn by the first humans during colder periods were not washed with detergent and dried in machines, but they were also not the synthetic fiber garments that trap bacteria and odor molecules so effectively that modern humans can make a shirt unwearable in a single day of intense physical activity. Animal skin, especially when treated with the brains and fats of the animal, as many traditional tanning methods use, has naturally antibacterial properties. Furthermore, the first humans in warm environments wore very little clothing at all, allowing their skin maximum exposure to air and sunlight, both of which reduce bacterial populations. In the cold environments where clothing was necessary, the skins used were different from modern synthetic garments in ways that reduced odor retention. There is another aspect of the hygiene of the first humans that deserves special attention and that rarely appears in these discussions: oral health. Breath odor is a significant component of the overall olfactory impression a person makes, and the state of oral health among the first humans was, perhaps surprisingly, often better than that of people in the first agricultural civilizations. Dental analysis of skeletal remains from hunter-gatherer populations consistently shows lower rates of dental caries than those found in the remains of early farmers, because the absence of refined carbohydrates and sugars from the hunter-gatherer diet dramatically reduces the conditions that favor the cavity-causing bacteria, responsible for most dental decay and the bad breath that accompanies it. The first humans did not have toothbrushes, but they also did not have the dietary conditions that make toothbrushes necessary the way they are for people who eat sugar regularly. Archaeological evidence suggests the first humans used small sticks and fibrous materials to clean their teeth, a practice still common in many traditional cultures today. The chewing of aromatic plant materials as a breath-freshening practice is documented in virtually all hunter-gatherer groups studied by anthropologists, and there are solid reasons to believe this practice goes back much further than historical records can directly confirm. Certain plants that the first humans had regular access to, such as various species of wild ginger, wild mint, and other aromatic plants, contain antimicrobial compounds that effectively reduce the oral bacteria responsible for bad breath. The fact that these plants were frequently chewed as part of the eating or exploratory behavior of the first humans means their teeth and gums had regular exposure to these natural compounds. There is also the question of adaptation and perception, which is fundamental to any honest discussion about the odor of the first humans. Human beings are extraordinarily good at adapting to the smells of their immediate social environment. The olfactory system has a well-documented phenomenon called habituation, in which repeated exposure to a stimulus causes the perception of that stimulus to diminish and eventually disappear. People who live together adapt to each other's baseline odor and cease to notice it. This is why you cannot smell your own home, but visitors can, why people who work with animals stop noticing the smell of those animals, why hospital workers become accustomed to odors that would be overwhelming to visitors. The first humans lived in close-knit tribal groups that spent their entire lives together. They were completely and deeply habituated to each other's odors. Within the group, individual body odor was essentially invisible, unnoticed, irrelevant, not a social problem in any way. The social meaning of odor is also deeply culturally constructed, and this is a point easy to overlook when we project modern Western attitudes toward body odor onto populations from different times and cultures. The contemporary Western obsession with the complete elimination of body odor is historically very recent, largely a product of the 20th century and the rise of the personal hygiene industry. For most of human history, including most of recorded history and literate civilizations, body odor was simply a fact of human existence, not a social stigma. Ancient Romans, Greeks, and Egyptians used perfumes and scented oils not primarily to mask body odor, but as luxury goods, status symbols, and ritual objects. Medieval Europeans, including royalty and nobility, bathed less frequently than modern people by contemporary standards and did not regard this as a social failing. The idea that body odor is inherently shameful or socially unacceptable is a very modern, very Western, and very commercially influenced idea that has been projected backward onto human history by a culture that profits enormously from selling products to address it. For the first humans, odor was not a social problem, it was information. The olfactory sense plays a profound role in human social cognition that modern life has largely suppressed, because we live in environments so saturated with artificial fragrances that our ability to read the natural chemical signals of other humans has been almost completely overwhelmed. But for the first humans living in small groups without any artificial scent masking, the smell of another person was rich with information. Body odor carries signals about health and disease, about immune system compatibility, about stress levels and emotional states, about reproductive status in women, about diet, and therefore about where a person had been and what they had been eating. Research on the major histocompatibility complex, the immune system genes that influence body odor, has shown that humans are naturally attracted to the body odors of people whose immune genes are different from their own, a preference that promotes genetic diversity in offspring. The first humans, with their unmasked and unmodified natural odors, were able to read this information clearly and use it in their social and reproductive decision-making in ways that modern humans, swimming in a sea of artificial fragrances, largely cannot anymore. There is a point of comparison that is essential for any honest answer to this question. Compared to what? When we ask whether the first humans smelled bad, we are implicitly comparing them to a standard, and that standard is the modern human with access to soap, shampoo, deodorant, clean water, and laundry facilities. But this comparison is less straightforward than it appears. A modern human who spent a day doing the physical work of the first humans, walking many kilometers across rough terrain, hunting and butchering animals, building shelter, gathering firewood, without access to any of their modern hygiene products, would at the end of that day smell considerably worse than the first humans typically did, precisely because their disrupted skin microbiome, their diet of processed foods, and their body accustomed to constant chemical management would produce odor, profiles that are more intense and less stable than those of people whose bodies had never been subjected to those disruptions. The first humans were also physically far more fit than the vast majority of modern humans, and physical fitness influences body odor in ways that are not immediately intuitive. Physically fit people sweat more efficiently, producing more dilute sweat that provides less substrate for bacterial odor production. Fit people also tend to regulate their temperature more effectively, sweating in more controlled ways that reduce the accumulation of sweat in the apocrine gland-rich areas most responsible for odor production. The constant physical activity of the first humans, who walked and ran and worked with their bodies every single day of their lives from childhood, produced bodies extraordinarily well adapted to physical exertion, with sweat systems that functioned more efficiently than those of sedentary modern people doing occasional intense exercise. There is also the matter of stress, which is a frequently overlooked factor in body odor production, but is significant. Psychological and physiological stress measurably increases the production of apocrine sweat, and the sweat produced in response to stress has a different chemical composition from the sweat produced by thermoregulation, being richer in the proteins and lipids that serve as substrate for bacterial odor production. The first humans certainly experienced stress, the acute stress of danger, of hunting, of confrontation with predators and with other human groups. But the kind of chronic and continuous stress that characterizes modern life, the stress of deadlines, of debt, of complex social relationships in highly structured work environments, of constant exposure to negative news, of living in dense and noisy urban environments, that kind of stress is a specific product of modern life that the first humans simply did not experience in the same way. And chronic stress is one of the most significant stimulators of odoriferous apocrine sweat production that exists. So what is the answer? Did the first humans on Earth smell bad? The honest and scientifically grounded answer is, compared to modern humans in contemporary Western societies, the first humans probably smelled different, but not necessarily worse, and in some respects possibly better. They smelled like humans who lived outdoors, who ate whole natural foods, who bathed in rivers and streams frequently enough to maintain basic cleanliness, who used natural materials including ochre, ash, and aromatic plants to care for their bodies, and whose skin microbiomes were in a state of natural ecological balance, rather than the disrupted state produced by modern hygiene product overuse. They smelled like people whose diet produced a less odoriferous sweat chemistry than that of most modern humans. They smelled like people whose bodies were adapted to physical work in ways that produced efficient, dilute sweat, rather than the concentrated, bacteria-rich sweat of sedentary people doing occasional intense exercise. They did not smell like a modern human who had not bathed in 6 months. They smelled like the outdoors, like wood smoke, which permeated everything they owned and everything they were, and which is itself a natural antibacterial agent that reduces skin bacterial populations, like the animals they hunted and the plants they gathered, like water and earth and cold air and the specific chemical signatures of whatever landscape they inhabited, like human beings in the most natural and unmediated form that human beings have ever existed. There is a moment worth imagining carefully. A woman of the first humans, perhaps 30 years old, which in that time meant a person of considerable experience and survival skill, standing in a cold river on an early morning, washing her face and arms in the clear water, her skin colored with ochre, mixed into animal fat that serves simultaneously as moisturizer, sunscreen, and antibacterial agent. Her hair is matted but not dirty, in the way a modern person would understand dirty, not greasy, with the sebum buildup that occurs when modern shampoo disrupts the natural oil regulation of the scalp, but wound with plant fibers and perhaps decorated with small feathers or beads of pierced shell. She smells of wood smoke and river water, and the wild herbs that grow on the bank where she is standing. She smells of the animal skin she is wearing, treated with birch bark tar to waterproof it, and of the specific chemical signature of her own body, the unique combination of genetic and dietary and environmental factors that make her scent as individual as her face. To modern nostrils, some of the notes in this complex would be unfamiliar. The animal fat, the smoke, the river mud, the wild herbs. But the underlying human chemistry, the warm mammalian core of it, would be recognizable. Would be human, because that is what she is, one of the first, one of us. The question of whether the first humans smelled bad tells us less about the first humans and more about ourselves. It reveals the assumptions we make about cleanliness and civilization, the equation we unconsciously draw between technological advancement and physical refinement, the belief that the further back in time we go, the more primitive and unpleasant human existence must have been. But the first humans were not failed modern people. They were successful first people, adapted to their environment in ways that we have largely lost, living in relationships with their own bodies and with the natural world that were in many respects more sophisticated and more ecologically intelligent than our own. They did not need deodorant because their bodies, in their natural environment, eating their natural diet, maintaining their natural microbiome, did not produce the level of odor that makes deodorant necessary. We need deodorant partly because the way we live has disrupted the very biological systems that the first humans maintained naturally. The next time you reach for your deodorant or your antibacterial soap or your artificially scented shampoo, consider for a moment what you are actually doing. You are managing a body that has been disrupted by civilization, by processed food and sedentary living and chemical products and enclosed environments, in ways that require constant technological intervention to maintain a level of odor acceptability that the first humans achieved naturally, without any products at all, simply by living the way human bodies evolved to live. They did not smell bad. They smelled like humans. The real question is whether 50,000 years from now, our distant descendants will look back at us and wonder how we managed to make ourselves so dependent on so many products just to smell like people. The first humans walked this earth for hundreds of thousands of years before the first bar of soap was ever made. They fell in love, raised children, created art, buried their dead, and built the cognitive and social foundations of everything that came after them, without ever once worrying about whether they smelled acceptable. They were the beginning of everything that we are. And they were magnificent. If this journey into the real daily lives of the first humans on Earth changed the way you think about who we are and where we came from, subscribe to First Humans, share this video with someone who has never thought about this question, and leave a comment below telling us what surprised you most. Every week on First Humans, we go deeper into the lives of the people who made us possible. We will see you on the next journey.